Scientific research can last for years or decades, with some experiments spanning over a century. While most studies only need a fraction of that time, it's still an extensive process. Research requires hypothesizing, testing, retesting, and then repeating those steps countless more times in various models.
If you're thinking of looking at developing a new product, a new drug, a new device, you initially have to test it in cells, and then from cells you can go to animal models.
That's Dr. Donna Arnett, Dean of the College of Public Health at the University of Kentucky. She says that in research, scientists aim to create an environment that reflects humans as closely as possible. These models are usually found in animals that Arnett says are important to use for two reasons.
First, understanding whether there's toxic effects of the drug or the device. And so there you're giving a range of doses to the animals and understanding in those animals if you get toxic effects like growths or cancers or death even. And those are important for understanding the safety of the drug. So that's step one. And then in the next step of testing, they're really in the animal domain, looking to see how the dosing needs to be adjusted depending on the animal size.
That step is called a dose ranging study. It figures out the safety and efficacy of a particular product. If everything in this step is successful, scientists then move into early phase 1 and phase 2 trials in humans.
So there you're looking at giving healthy individuals the dose and testing the dose ranging in human beings and testing for not only the efficacy of those different levels of drugs, but also the safety to see if there are any adverse events. And so once you pass through that early phase testing in humans, you go into phase 2 studies where you're really looking at more individuals and more individuals with the disease to see if the product works in people with the disease the product is intended for.
The process might sound fairly straightforward, but ensuring the safety of a product takes time. The National Center for Biotechnology Information says the animal testing portion alone usually takes around 4 years to complete. While species like monkeys and dogs can be used, many studies use mice.
Mice are well controlled. You can control the temperature of their diet. There's no variability. Whereas we humans, we're kind of hard to control, as you can imagine. We like to eat what we like to eat, and we have very different environments. So the animal models are really helpful in that you control all of these other variables.
She says another benefit of using mice is that researchers can change the expression of certain genes in the rodents.
You can create these mice models that overrepresent hypertension or lipid abnormalities that I'm in cardiovascular disease. And that helps us to identify the effect of a drug on a particular genetic disease.
However, when wanting a clear picture of how a treatment will affect the human body, Arnett says mice models are not very representative. For example, the American Heart Association recently funded a study looking at how e-cigarettes affect long-term heart health in adolescents. Dr. Lauren Wold is the senior author of the study. He's a professor of nursing and medicine and the associate dean for research operations and compliance at The Ohio State University.
We exposed the animals to vaping products, so it was a combination of both propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin with nicotine, and we exposed them from 3 weeks of age, which is considered adolescence in a mouse, up until 3 months. And so this is what's considered adult. And what we found was that male adolescent mice had significant effects on the heart. So they had a reduction in function of the heart. So the ability of the heart to contract and to pump blood throughout the body was impaired.
Wold believes the paper's findings seem to prove the negative effects of vaping in male adolescents. However, Dr. Neil Benowitz says we can't accurately compare the effects of mice to what happens in humans. Benowitz is a professor of medicine emeritus in the Division of Cardiology at the University of California, San Francisco.
It's really impossible to extrapolate this to humans for several reasons. The paper did not describe what aerosol characteristics what temperature was being used, and that's important. Second is that the exposure in the study was really extreme. They filled the chamber, which the mice were, with aerosol every minute for 4 hours a day for 5 days a week. Vapors don't use it like that. They take maybe 5 puffs or 10 puffs a period of time, and then wait for a later period of time and take more. They space it out. So they make sure they're not getting too much at one time.
Despite his concerns, Benowitz says the first of its kind study is a good starting point for future research. So what should the average person keep in mind when reading about promising advancements in mice studies?
What they should take away, though, is that there's a lot more work to be done in terms of understanding whether that mouse model finding can translate into human disease. So then, just as I described earlier, early phase 1 studies in humans would be done in healthy people to understand whether or not there are any safety issues, and then dose ranging studies to understand the right dose for humans. And then it would move into people with disease in small numbers, and they would repeat those same kinds of testing parameters to understand whether or not the drug is safe and effective.
You can find more information about Doctors Lauren Wold, Donna Arnett, and Neil Benowitz on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. For more behind the scenes, search Radio Health Journal on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our production manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Nancy Benson. Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
It can be very frustrating for families who are calling because there's such a high need and there's not enough space to meet the demand.
How the pandemic contributed to overcrowded women's shelters.
Then a new law that helps protect patients from surprise medical bills.
These are the types of bills that you think are covered by your insurance, you expect to be covered, and then it turns out it's not covered.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal. I'm Reed Pence, the producer and host of Radio Health Journal. If you like listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
We have not built the institutions that allow young people to find their way through that maze of choices.
Navigating the post-secondary school process. Then,
that foreshadows some considerable disruption for farmers in the Corn Belt. Not many industries that I know of can handle a 40% drop in demand.
Will the increased demand for electric cars disrupt the ethanol industry? I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Radio Health Journal and Viewpoints on your favorite radio station. And subscribe and listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Radio Health Journal.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more, and check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.